At the Johnson family's annual summer cookout in Scottsdale, Arizona, the air was thick with mesquite smoke and judgment, while ribs sizzled on the grill and the sound of kids laughing filled the backyard. 32-year-old Rachel stood quietly by the fence, nursing a lemonade and doing her best to ignore the subtle digs flying her way. Across the yard, her younger sister, Vanessa, was the center of attention, glowing in a designer jumpsuit and recounting her latest accomplishments to a circle of impressed relatives. Vanessa just wrapped up dual master's degrees at Harvard and Stanford. Their mother beamed proudly to anyone within earshot. She's already interviewing with top-tier companies. She's going places. The applause that followed was predictable. Then came the familiar shift in tone. And some of us, her mother added with a pointed glance at Rachel, are still figuring things out. Her father chimed in from behind the grill with a chuckle. Still dabbling in that online project, or whatever it is, he said, casually dismissing her life's work. It wasn't said with cruelty, but it didn't have to be. The condescension was clear. Rachel said nothing. She didn't need to. Behind her calm demeanor was the quiet confidence of someone who had built something real. She knew something her family didn't, that the tech firm Vanessa had been raving about Rachel owned it. And while they saw her as the lost art major, Rachel had long since become someone they couldn't begin to understand. Not yet, anyway. But that day was coming. From the outside, Rachel Johnson looked like the family's biggest disappointment. She didn't have the Ivy League degrees, the polished LinkedIn profile, or the constant stream of praise from their parents like her younger sister Vanessa did. At every family event, whether it was Thanksgiving, a birthday, or their annual summer BBQ, Rachel was the punchline. Still figuring it out, her mom would ask with a forced smile. Maybe your sister can help you find a real job, her dad would joke. Nobody ever asked what Rachel actually did, and she never bothered to correct their assumptions. Let them talk, because while they laughed, Rachel was building an empire. 10 years earlier, Rachel had started Cascade Logic from a cramped studio apartment in Tempe. With nothing but an old laptop, a stubborn work ethic, and a refusal to give up, she spent years freelancing, consulting, and learning everything she could about digital workflows and automation systems. What began as a small one-woman operation quickly evolved into a thriving tech consultancy. By the time she turned 30, Cascade Logic had landed Fortune 100 clients, rolled out industry-leading AI systems, and grossed 8 figures in quarterly revenue. But Rachel didn't flaunt any of it. She chose to lead from the shadows using a professional alias, R.E., Lynn, and letting her company's performance speak louder than her presence. Not even her closest relatives knew the truth. They still saw her as the artsy dreamer who couldn't hold down a real job. Meanwhile, her sister Vanessa was checking every box valedictorian MBA internships handed down through family connections, polished speeches, and endless applause. Rachel watched from the sidelines as their parents poured every ounce of pride into Vanessa's achievements. She wasn't bitter, just patient. Then fate handed her a moment she couldn't have scripted better if she tried. At that very BBQ, where her parents once again dismissed her little business, Vanessa proudly announced she had an upcoming interview with a top tech firm, Cascade Logic. She had no idea Rachel was the founder and CEO of the company she had been gushing about for weeks. No idea that Rachel had personally seen her resume sitting in the shortlist sent over by HR. No idea that the woman she believed was lost and directionless was in fact the architect of her dream job. Rachel smiled behind her glass of lemonade, letting the irony settle in. She remembered every sacrifice she had made to get here, the nights she skipped sleep to meet deadlines, the clients she had to chase, the loneliness of building something when nobody believed in her. It wasn't just about success anymore. It was about knowing her worth without needing validation. She had spent a decade growing a billion-dollar company in silence, and now it was time for her family to learn who she really was, but not out of revenge. Rachel never wanted to shame them. She simply wanted them to see what she had become, not because of their support, but in spite of their doubt. While they celebrated degrees and job titles, Rachel built something lasting, something real, and soon the very people who dismissed her would have no choice but to recognize the woman they overlooked for years. Not the artist, not the confused consultant, but the CEO. It was almost poetic, the way everything came full circle without Rachel Johnson having to lift a finger. Just a few hours after being quietly mocked by her family at their backyard BBQ, she found herself reviewing the final interview schedule for Cascade Logic. And there on the list was a familiar name, Vanessa Johnson, her younger sister, the golden child, the one their parents couldn't stop bragging about. Vanessa had been thrilled to announce in front of the whole extended family that she had landed an interview with one of the fastest rising tech firms in the country. She had no idea that the company she was desperate to impress was Rachel's. She had spent weeks raving about Cascade Logic, praising its innovative approach and competitive hiring standards. She had even suggested, half-jokingly, that if she got hired, she might be able to help Rachel get a foot in the door. Rachel had barely kept a straight face. What Vanessa and everyone else didn't realize was that Rachel had built Cascade Logic from scratch, growing it into a billion-dollar consultancy with clients across the globe. For the last 10 years, she had been the quiet force behind every major move the company made. While Vanessa worked internships handed to her through family connections and chased corporate clout, Rachel was sitting in boardrooms, negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts and mentoring the next generation of female tech leaders. And yet her parents still asked if she was still doing that freelance thing. Now the moment was here. Vanessa, who had walked into the interview process with a mixture of entitlement and confidence, had no idea that the final decision would come down to the very sister she had underestimated for years. Rachel didn't intervene in the process. She let her executive team conduct the initial rounds, all while she watched from behind one-way glass. She saw Vanessa walk in with her designer suit and carefully rehearsed lines. On paper, Vanessa looked perfect, dual degrees, polished experience, glowing recommendations. But as the interviews went on, cracks began to show. Her answers were shallow, her confidence unearned. Each panelist began to see what Rachel already knew, that Vanessa's resume was built more on privilege than substance. By the time it was Rachel's turn to meet her sister face to face, Vanessa was visibly shaken. She entered the CEO's office expecting to impress a faceless executive. But when Rachel turned her chair and looked her straight in the eyes, the color drained from Vanessa's face. Miss Lynn she had greeted only to be corrected. "It's Miss Johnson, Rachel Johnson," she replied calmly. "Nice to finally meet the person who's been so excited to join my company." It was a moment Rachel had imagined 100 different ways over the years, but standing there in her corner office, dressed in a tailored McQueen suit and surrounded by proof of everything she'd built, she didn't feel triumphant, just clear. She didn't need to embarrass Vanessa. The truth was enough. Vanessa stumbled through her confusion, trying to reconcile the woman in front of her with the sister she'd always believed was floundering. But Rachel held her ground. She laid out the facts with grace and composure, the real work behind Cascade Logic, the hollow nature of Vanessa's achievements, and the harsh feedback she'd received from the interview panels. No, Vanessa wouldn't be getting the job, not because Rachel held a grudge, but because she hadn't earned it. That day, Rachel didn't just reveal her success. She held up a mirror to everything her family had refused to see, that the daughter they thought had no direction had in fact been leading the way the entire time. The moment Vanessa Johnson stepped into the sleek glass conference room on the top floor of Cascade Logic, she had no idea that her carefully curated world was about to crumble. She had walked in with the same poise and confidence she always carried. Chanel suit pressed heels, sharp resume, memorized to perfection. She believed she was just one step away from joining one of the hottest tech firms in the country. What she didn't realize was that the final interview wasn't just with the CEO, it was with her sister, Rachel Johnson, the very woman she and her parents had spent years belittling. Rachel watched from behind the one-way glass as Vanessa entered the room, shaking hands with each panelist like she already belonged there. But it didn't take long for her polished exterior to show cracks. Every time a question dug deeper than surface-level talking points, Vanessa faltered. She tried to cover with buzzwords and charm, but Rachel could see the panic behind her sister's eyes. This wasn't a networking event or a family dinner. This was a test of real substance, and Vanessa hadn't brought enough to the table. By the time the final interview came around, Vanessa's voice had lost its edge, and her confidence had faded into uncertainty. She entered Rachel's office without a clue who sat behind the high-backed chair, gazing out over the Phoenix skyline. When Rachel finally turned around, the silence in the room thickened. Vanessa blinked as the realization set in. "Miss Johnson," she stammered, trying to steady her tone. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." Rachel gave her a cool, even smile. "Actually, it's Miss Johnson, Rachel Renee Johnson," she said, locking eyes with her sister, CEO of Cascade Logic. The shock on Vanessa's face was immediate and total. Years of arrogance, entitlement, and condescension drained away in a single heartbeat. This wasn't the version of Rachel she thought she knew, the confused sister with vague job titles and no clear future. This was a powerful executive, in control, respected, and entirely out of reach. Vanessa tried to recover. She asked questions, offered apologies, even hinted at a shared sisterhood that had long been ignored. But Rachel wasn't cruel. She was simply honest. She told Vanessa the truth. The interviews hadn't gone well. The hiring team had found her unprepared, overconfident, and lacking real-world depth. And more importantly, Rachel wasn't going to override their decisions just because they shared a last name. "You asked for an interview with the CEO," Rachel said, standing tall in her tailored suit. "And I gave you one. What you chose to bring into that room, that's on you." Vanessa's face crumpled, not from sadness, but from sheer humiliation. She wasn't just losing a job opportunity, she was being confronted with the truth about herself. For the first time, she realized that talent and determination can't be faked with connections or polished appearances. And Rachel had let the facts speak for themselves. No revenge, no grand speech, just consequences. As Vanessa was escorted out of the office, her shoulders slumped and voice cracking, Rachel turned back toward the window. She didn't need validation or applause. That moment had never been about revenge. It was about clarity. The people who once mocked her were now seeing her for who she truly was. And as CEO of a billion-dollar firm, Rachel knew the work spoke louder than anything her family had ever said. As the elevator doors slid shut behind her, Rachel Johnson felt a wave of quiet closure wash over her. The encounter with Vanessa had gone exactly as she expected, not with shouting, not with revenge, but with clarity. Her sister had walked into that office expecting to impress a stranger and walk away with a prestigious job title. Instead, she had come face to face with the very woman she'd spent years belittling, the sister she'd assumed was lost and directionless. The final decision was made, and it wasn't personal. It was professional. Vanessa simply wasn't qualified. Rachel hadn't needed to raise her voice or shame anyone. She let the facts and Vanessa's performance speak for themselves. The feedback from the interview panels had been unanimous. Vanessa came across as unprepared, arrogant, and entitled. Everything looked polished on paper, but the substance was missing. And Rachel, as CEO of Cascade Logic, wasn't about to make exceptions, not even for family. What stunned Vanessa most wasn't the rejection. It was the realization that her entire perception of Rachel had been wrong. For years, she'd assumed her older sister was floundering, clinging to odd freelance gigs and living paycheck to paycheck. But standing in that office, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows, innovation awards, and magazine covers, Vanessa saw the truth. Rachel wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Rachel had built something from the ground up without shortcuts, without favors, and without anyone's permission. While their parents poured their pride into Vanessa's degrees and internships, Rachel had been working in the shadows building, learning, evolving. Cascade Logic wasn't just a company. It was a testament to Rachel's resilience. After Vanessa left the building, the fallout was immediate. Rachel's phone buzzed with frantic family messages. Her mother was the first to react. "What kind of cruel joke is this? Vanessa is devastated." Then came her father. "How could you humiliate your sister like that? We raised you better." Rachel stared at the screen for a moment, then calmly turned her phone face down on the desk. They finally knew who she really was, but they still didn't understand. She didn't respond with explanations or apologies. Instead, she sent one message to the family group chat. "You raised me to be successful. Congratulations." You did. It was simple, honest, and enough. Rachel no longer needed their approval. She had outgrown their narrow definitions of success. For years, they'd measured worth in academic achievements and job titles handed out by others. But Rachel had forged her own path, and now, standing at the helm of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country, she knew exactly what she was capable of. That day wasn't about putting Vanessa down. It was about holding a mirror to the truth. And in doing so, Rachel had given her sister the most honest feedback she'd ever received. Vanessa would have to find her own way now. The easy road, the handouts, the assumptions, they wouldn't work anymore. Not in Rachel's world. Because in Rachel Johnson's world, success wasn't given. It was earned. The silence that followed Vanessa's failed interview at Cascade Logic spoke louder than any words ever could. Rachel Johnson had said nothing to the rest of the family she hadn't needed to. The damage wasn't hers to deliver. It had come naturally, unraveling the web of assumptions that had been spun around her for years. The messages started pouring in that very afternoon. Her mother accused her of playing a cruel joke, while her father scolded her for humiliating Vanessa. But Rachel didn't bite. She simply let their reactions roll off her, just as she had with their judgment all those years. The truth had finally arrived, whether they were ready or not. In the days that followed, the Johnson family dynamic began to shift subtly at first, then unmistakably. The once lively Sunday BBQs that had been a family staple went quiet. Her parents, once the proud hosts of every gathering, stopped inviting everyone over. There were no more public updates about Vanessa's career trajectory, no more boastful conversations about our brilliant daughter climbing the corporate ladder. The silence was thick with discomfort, part shame, part disbelief. Vanessa, after being denied the executive role she had expected to walk into, ended up accepting a mid-level project coordinator position at a boutique agency across town. It was respectable, sure, but not what she had envisioned. There was no corner office, no fast track to the top, just an average job that required actual work earned the traditional way without shortcuts or family connections. She stopped posting about career milestones on social media. Her online confidence dimmed. Rachel, on the other hand, didn't slow down. She didn't explain herself or soften her success to make anyone more comfortable. She kept running Cascade Logic, closing enterprise deals, and expanding her company's global presence. From her corner office in downtown Phoenix, she watched her family finally grapple with the truth they had ignored for so long. It wasn't just about being underestimated anymore. It was about stepping fully into her identity without apology. And then, the moment that sealed everything came 3 months later. Forbes released a full-length feature titled "The Silent Success: How One Woman Built a Billion-Dollar Tech Empire in the Shadows of Doubt." Rachel's face was on the cover. No more silhouettes, no more aliases, just her standing tall against the skyline of Cascade Logic's headquarters. The article detailed her rise from freelancing in a small Tempe apartment to building one of the country's most respected AI-integrated consulting firms. It laid out the sacrifices, the solitude, and the strength it took to build what others had refused to see. Rachel didn't send a message to the family that week. She didn't explain, justify, or offer any commentary. She just had 10 copies of Forbes shipped express to each of their homes. No note, no explanation, just the truth. That cover story changed the way her family looked at her, but not in the way they might have hoped. It wasn't just pride that followed. It was realization. The daughter they'd ignored, the sister they'd pitied, had become the most successful person in the family, not with their help, but despite their doubt. And Rachel, she didn't need their applause. She had already moved on to the next milestone. Because real success doesn't ask for recognition, it simply signs the check. While the world had finally taken notice of Rachel Johnson's success, she no longer needed the spotlight. After years of being the family afterthought, the one overlooked at every dinner, every holiday, every conversation, Rachel had built something unshakable. She didn't shout demand praise or try to prove herself. Instead, she worked, quietly, relentlessly. And now, standing at the helm of a billion-dollar tech company, she didn't need their applause. The numbers spoke. The client spoke. Her name on the building spoke. The people who once dismissed her now struggled to look her in the eye. Family calls became shorter. Laughter was more forced. Her success had rewritten the narrative, and everyone else was scrambling to keep up. But Rachel wasn't angry anymore. She had outgrown the need for validation. In its place, there was peace, clarity, and most of all, purpose. She was no longer trying to belong at the family table. She was building her own, one where she set the tone, where quiet ambition was seen and resilience was honored. If you've ever been the one they counted out, the one they rolled their eyes at, or the one they never took seriously, this is your reminder. You don't have to prove them wrong to become right with yourself. Your worth isn't tied to their recognition. It's measured by what you build, how you grow, and the peace you find in knowing your path is your own. So tell me, what are you building in silence? What dream are you chasing while they're doubting you? Drop your story in the comments. Let's lift each other up. And if you felt even 1 ounce of fire from Rachel's journey, hit subscribe. This channel isn't about loud wins. It's about real ones.